Hi, this is Joyce Polino Crane. I'm the news director at WestfordCAT. I'm here today with Mike Mullen, who is the independent candidate for the congressional seat for district, the 1st Middlesex District 3. Did I get that right, Mike?
3rd Massachusetts
For the
District.
3rd
Yep.
Middlesex District. Sorry, I have so many campaigns that I'm juggling.
Yeah, no, all the state and
Yes, there's state and there's local. So let's get this straight again. So it's for the 3rd
Massachusetts U.S. Congressional District. So it goes from Winchendon to Haverhill on the New Hampshire border, then down to Marlborough, kind of like a triangle. So
Okay, great. And you live in Maynard.
I live in Maynard in the southern part of the district, yes.
Yeah, so I invited you here today to just sort of get a feel for what you stand for.
Thanks for having me.
Oh, I'm happy to have you. And I thought we would start with just talking a little bit about where you grew up.
Sure.
And your background, your career background as well.
Will do. I grew up in Sudbury and went to Lincoln Sudbury High School, graduated in the mid-'80s, and then went off to Carleton College. And that's one of the areas where I started getting interested in politics. One of my professors there was Paul Wellstone, who at the time was involved in local state politics in Minnesota and ended up being U.S. Senator from Minnesota after I graduated. And one of my friends' fathers had worked in the State House and got me an internship with Governor Dukakis. And that was when he was running for president, so we got to experience both the governance as well as the campaign. So we'd work at the State House during the day and go over to the campaign in the evening.
No, really?
Yeah,
That must have been a wonderful experience.
Yeah, it was a great experience. As an intern, you got to do a little bit more than you normally would because people were so busy with the campaign. So it was nice to learn about the regular day-to-day constituent services, but also there were some projects that you'd get involved in. I was involved in, I think one of the federal facilities had an asbestos challenge, so I worked with the environmental organization and so forth, so that was kind of interesting. And then my supervisor there, the following summer, hooked me up with an internship in Washington, D.C. for Congressman Barney Frank, and that was also very interesting during the campaign. So that was in '88, I believe, and just living in D.C. and experiencing all of that was quite an experience that made its mark on me. And after I graduated from college, I ran for Lincoln Sudbury Regional School District the first year after I graduated, which gave me experience in an election, doing interviews, getting on the ballot, those type of things, and haven't been involved in politics as much since that time, but that's kind of where the foundation came from.
Did you actually end up sitting on that committee?
I did not. I was running against 2 incumbents.
Yeah.
So to give myself some comfort, I was the highest vote getter of the losing candidates that year across the board in the town elections. But it was a good experience to learn about that, how the committees work as well as the election process itself.
Yeah, I think I always see first-time candidates as, that's their stepping stone.
Yep.
Very often they run again and they make it in. It sounds like you went on to other things.
Yes, so I was very into rugby for a long time. I actually went over and lived in Scotland for 4 months, played over there, played some international tournaments.
When was this?
I went over to Scotland in, I think, 94, 95. I was about 25 years old then. And there was a club in Peebles, which is the north of the borders, so a little bit south of Edinburgh, about 20 miles south, and did that for, like I said, 4 or 5 months. And when I came back, I was fortunate enough to tour with a team that was kind of just below the national team. I made the national team pool for a couple years, but never got called up for a game. And then I moved to Maynard with my wife, Michelle, who's a social worker, in 2002.
So when did you get married?
We got married in 2000.
Okay, so was this before or after the jaunt to Scotland?
This was after.
Okay.
I started dating her when I got back. She's also a rugby player, so we have that in common. She actually played for the national team. I was able to go over in 1999 and watch her play in Hong Kong against the New Zealand All Blacks in the big stadium. So it was a pretty cool experience.
That's a tough game.
It is a tough game.
I've never known a woman who played it, so that's...
Yeah, no.
Obviously there are, but I've never met one.
Yeah, she played with the Beantown Rugby Club in Boston, and they are one of the perennial powerhouses. They won the national championship in '96 with her, and then I think they were finalists for like 4 of the next 5 years.
Wow.
So So then in 2002, we moved to Maynard, had our son Ethan was born that fall, and then our daughter Jordan was born a couple years later, and been in Maynard ever since. Work in information technology in the healthcare field, specifically workers' compensation, work to get people back to work with different products, PPO products, pharmacy benefit management, case management, bill review, and I found that's been a good background for this campaign, since healthcare is such a big issue for folks.
Yes, healthcare is a big issue, and I was thinking that. So first of all, I just want to say that you have the best website I've ever seen.
Thank you.
It's really organized. Is it because you're an IT guy that you were able to organize it so well?
Some of that. So I did some myself. I have some friends who are more talented technically than me. I kind of work as a liaison between the really technical folks and the business folks. So I know enough to be dangerous, but I had some folks that I've worked with before help me out on some pieces of it.
Well, it's really good. It's
Thank you.
Mullen28.com.
2018, yeah.
2018.com, sorry.
No problem. Thank you.
We'll put a slide up. Mullen2018.com.
Yes.
And you have on there, one of your tabs is issues.
Mm-hmm.
And so I clicked on that, and you have a whole list of issues that I thought maybe what we could do is just try a lightning round.
Sure.
And I'll just mention an issue, some of them that you had on your website, and some of them might be surprises
Sure.
for you.
Okay.
And you just give us a little bit of an overview of what your stance is on those on these topics. So the first one is opioid crisis.
Yeah, that's been devastating. Again, in workers' comp, I have some experience with it. That's where it kind of hit first, in that when you get hurt on a job, there's strains, sprains, breaks, and pain management is a big piece of that. So when Purdue Pharma said that they had this new drug that was safe, doctors prescribed it at a pretty high rate, and we started seeing people having chronic issues with addiction and so forth. So some of the things on the front end, as far as prescription drug management programs, looking at physician dispensing, those are things that can carry over. And then what it's led to is abuse out in the world with street drugs like heroin, and more recently fentanyl, which is 50 times more powerful and very dangerous. So I think one of my priorities would be to advocate for more support for medically assisted treatment, using things like methadone and buprenorphine to get people back into a recovery mode. Most public health professionals have stated that this is not something that's easy to do on your own, and medically assisted treatment has been proven to work. So I think we need to be able to remove the barriers to that. A lot of people don't know that you need a special waiver to prescribe that above and beyond what you can do as a provider. And to me, that's kind of crazy that the drug that's going to help you, you need the special waiver, yet you don't need it for prescribing OxyContin, which got you in the problem in the first place. So I think some rules could be changed in that, as well as maybe leveraging the primary care system a little bit more, training primary care providers in that regard. And then another thing that makes sense to me is expanding this treatment to people who are incarcerated. Those folks are the ones who have the highest overdose rates. They don't have access to the treatment, they don't have access to the support. So there was a pilot in Rhode Island that proved very successful in reducing that dramatically. And in addition to prescribing that, people are hooked up with recovery specialists when they get out. So I think that's a pretty powerful thing that we can do to help folks out.
Very interesting. And staying in that realm, healthcare, single payer?
Sure. I am in favor of single payer. I think it's inevitable at some point. I know people tout the big cost of it. I'd argue that the cost of not doing it is probably greater. In fact, when the Koch brothers commissioned a study by the WestfordCAT Institute, one of their analysis said that the Medicare for All program that Senator Sanders was proposing was $2 trillion less over 10 years. That's $200 billion a year. That's a lot of money. I think one of the things, though, other than just the single payer that we need to do is move towards a more outcome-based system, more wellness-based. So things like ACOs, where you're incented to look at the overall well-being of the patient and become more
What's ACO?
Accountable care organizations. And essentially that is a group of providers that will have responsibility for the patient, and you'll have incentives to make sure that they're getting the preventative treatment, that it's provided in a coordinated fashion that hopefully overall has a better outcome, and then also a lower cost. And with that lower cost, then the providers get some incentive to get a share of the savings in that regard.
Okay. What about housing?
Housing, I think, is one of the biggest issues, particularly in this area. With the high cost of housing and some of the transportation challenges, it's very difficult for people to make ends meet. So even, I think wage stagnation has been a big problem and is increasing slowly now. But even with that, with the high cost of housing, there's a lot of challenges. One thing that I think we need to keep an eye on is the low-income housing tax credit. That's been pretty successful, but with the changes in the corporate tax rates, some folks think that it will be less of incentive for people to make those investments. Right now, we haven't seen that, but I think we need to keep an eye on it. I'm in favor of what I've seen from Senator Warren's American Housing and Mobility Act. I think what she's doing there makes a lot of sense. One of the things is to provide down payment support for people who have been subject to redlining in the past. The Community Reinvestment Act kind of expand some of the authority there. And I think that's very important because it's...
What's redlining?
So redlining is when financial institutions would literally on maps draw these lines on where they weren't going to make loans and disproportionately affected communities of color. And so the Community Reinvestment Act set rules at the federal level that said you needed to serve these communities. And that was fairly successful in providing the entryway to home ownership for a lot of people. Some of that has been kind of weakened over the years. So this expands that a little bit. When it was originally put in place, there wasn't as much use for credit unions, so they weren't included in that legislation. This would modernize it for that standpoint. And then another thing it does is provide funding for community development block grants that could be used in more well-off communities to give them incentives to make zoning changes to expand the housing base. Right now, a lot of zoning is legislated at the local level, so it's difficult from a state or a federal standpoint to make mandates. So this is kind of a carrot approach of giving you an incentive. You know, we'll help you fund this new park, but you need to build X amount of housing stock, that type of thing. And then at the state level, one of the things that Governor Baker had proposed, and the legislature hasn't taken up yet, hopefully they will in the next session, is to reduce the need for a local zoning law change from 2/3 to a simple majority. Right now, it's very difficult at the local level to make some of those zoning changes, and for good reasons. People are concerned about what the impacts are going to be to the town from services and so forth, but I think we need to be overall responsible citizens and be as inclusive and provide opportunities to folks as well.
Right, interesting. What about mental health and school safety? That's a huge issue right now, especially in Westford.
Right. I think over the last few years, I've been happy that mental health, behavioral health is starting to become more mainstream. Some stigma has been reduced from that, but I think we have a long way to go. I think it's very important for people to understand that this is something that's real. It's not a weakness type thing. So I'm all for expanding access to it. I think formally in the policy world, they call it parity, that you want to make sure that mental health and physical health are treated the same, and so when you have insurance and coverage that that's provided. There's, I think, Catherine Clark in the, I'm spacing on what's district, the 5th district, I think, she's proposed some legislation to make sure there's school counselors available in every school to be able to provide that services to children. I think anxiety is a big challenge these days. The pace of the world, the kind of online electronic nature of it. There's a lot of challenges in that area, and I think we need to support our children in that fashion.
Well, we've put them under a great deal of stress. They're overloaded,
yes,
especially at the high school level.
Yeah, definitely a lot of
opinion.
pressure to perform at a very young age, and kind of taking away the childhood a little bit. I think there needs to be a balance between the preparation for adulthood as well as being able to be a kid and not have the worries of a high pressure, I need to get in this college, I need to take this AP class.
Right.
It can be very competitive.
What about expanding beds for mental health hospitals?
I'd be in favor of that. I think one of the challenges we've seen in the criminal justice world over the last number of decades is some changes that were well-intentioned from some state institutions that were not treating mental health patients in a good way, but we didn't really have a good transition plan. It was kind of, all right, we're going to get rid of this bad thing, but we didn't have a way for them to go. And so these folks haven't had the support that they need. So I think we need to be able to expand that as well.
Okay, very good. Moving on, student debt.
This is a big one. I have a sophomore and a freshman in high school, so it's hitting home very quickly. A number of things there. I think we need to think of education holistically. So one of the things that the student loan guarantees by the federal government has done is expanded the access to a college education, which on the surface is a good thing. But college isn't necessarily for everyone. There's certificate programs, there's trade programs, different vocational training that may be better suited for different people. So I think we need to be able to build out a robust infrastructure that allows people to kind of get to the right size. That said, if college is the right thing for you, I think we need to be able to provide an affordable way to finance that. The federal government shouldn't be making money off these loans. I think we've taken care of most of that, but we need to make sure that that doesn't happen again. At one point, we were charging rates where it ended up being a profit center for the federal government.
Right.
That doesn't make any sense to me. And then as far as getting support behind this, I think we need to look at it as an opportunity cost. Right now, there's $1.5 trillion of student debt. Aside from mortgage debt, that's the biggest amount of debt out there. And that means these people are not buying houses, they're not buying cars, they're not starting families, they're getting stuck in jobs because they need to make their student loan payment where they may be more productive in a different job, but they're afraid to change or aren't able to because of the compensation. So this is really going to be affecting the economy in that regard. And another area that I think has gotten overlooked is we've done a pretty good job of going after the private institutions that had some predatory lending and misrepresented the amount of training they were going to give to individuals. But I think the private nonprofits need to have skin in the game as well. So there's this arms race of like, who can build the best dorm, like, what dining plan do you have, what athletic facilities, and that's great, but that's caused college to skyrocket. And the inflation rate there is multiple times of what it is in the rest of the economy. So if these institutions are being funded by federally backed loans, I think they need to make sure they're stepping up to the plate and have the graduation rates and the support for their students, that the job placement is where it should be. And if not, they should have some skin in the game and some accountability if those loans aren't are defaulted on. And lastly, I don't agree with the way student loans are treated as a separate type of debt.
Right.
Right now, you cannot discharge it in bankruptcy. Not that I'm advocating for people to go bankrupt, but if you're in that situation, you cannot treat that like other pieces of debt. And even how it's refinanced, it becomes more challenging. So in my mind, there's not a real reason to have that treated separately. I think the same financial rules that apply to other types of loans and financial instruments should apply.
Very good. Very interesting. What about the economy, today's economy?
This is one of the areas that I'm most concerned about. I say that we need to move to a stakeholder economy versus a shareholder economy. And by that I mean right now there's a lot of emphasis on ownership and maximizing shareholder value. And this started in the 70s with Milton Friedman. And right now that promotes short-term thinking. It is caused a concentration of wealth in a certain class. I think from a long-term perspective, if we expand it to a stakeholder model where you treat customers, you treat employees, you treat vendors, you treat your community as all having a stake in it, then you can provide better long-term returns, and it will be better overall for the economy. So I'm in favor for a tax structure that is more progressive. There's something called the People's Budget that would return towards the early 80s, where it'd come down from about 70% as the top level to about 50%. And it wouldn't be 50% for all earners. I think the People's Budget does it if you're earning over more than $1 billion a year, which is a very small amount of people. But it is a higher marginal tax rate for the top earners. And so I think that's something. Another area that I think is consideration is indexing the minimum wage. So Social Security benefits are indexed to a cost of living inflation. And that we don't do that with the minimum wage, and we've seen that politically it's very difficult to move the minimum wage. It happens in fits and starts, and there's a long period of time where people are just having that same minimum wage. I think if you had it indexed, they'd get the benefit over that. It would be a lot easier for employers to digest, because instead of going up these steps $1, $2 at a time, it would be something that's like a few percent. Along the lines with inflation. So it would help the workers, they'd get the benefit over time, help the employers, and then politically it'd be a lot more viable. So that's another thing that I'd be pushing for when I get to Congress.
Okay, immigration.
Obviously, that's a big one. I mean, this week there's the talk of the caravan coming up from Central America. When I joined this race, immigration was important to me, but it's moved up on my priority list for a couple reasons. And the main reason is I think it's being used to divide us. And I think that's tragic and ironic. We're a nation of immigrants. We were formed by lots of different cultures getting together. I think it's helped us to have that robust culture where we can be dynamic and creative, and then economically as well. Most employers need workers. We're at the lowest unemployment in 30, 40, 50 years.
Shocking.
And
it's a shocking turn of events since 2009.
It is. And unfortunately, we haven't been able to have people participate broadly in the wage increase, but the employment has improved. So I think we need to expand that. I'm in favor of something like the 2013 Gang of Eight bill, which was it addressed modernization, so moving towards a points-based system which blends in family ties and skills and education. And we need to make sure that that's dynamic, because that changes over time. We do need to secure our borders. I don't think a wall is the best way to do it politically or practically. I think you can do things with sensors, with fencing, and then upgrading our ports. A lot of our ports today don't have the technology, don't have the capacity to deal with the immigration that we have.
You're talking seaports?
Seaports and even land ports as well. So like if you're inspecting a vehicle as it comes through, right now it's not super efficient. You can wait in line for hours and hours at a border coming across. So I think we need to be able to do that. And then taking up another level, I think as a member of the world community, if we're looking to help these countries out and promote our way of life, there's not going to be necessarily the need for people to come up. So the folks who are coming up from Honduras and Guatemala and Mexico right now, they're fleeing violence, they're fleeing poor economic opportunity. So I think we need to make sure that we participate in the world community and not just withdraw back into more of a nationalist looking situation.
How realistic is that with the current administration?
I think it's very challenging. I'm hoping some things change in November, have a little bit more dialogue in that regard. But I'm also hoping from kind of the business standpoint that saner minds prevail, as we talked about a minute or two ago. We need workers. I mean, it's a very low unemployment rate, so we need to solve this problem. It's something that our economy is going to be dependent on.
So last one, transgender, the transgender issues. Where do you stand on that?
I'm a big yes vote on 3. I think the
ballot question
question 3, support of transgender rights. On this one, it always, as an independent, I've talked about being pragmatic versus dogmatic and willing to compromise and look at things. Human rights is something I don't feel like I can compromise on, and to me this is a basic human right issue. So I'm very supportive of it. I think Massachusetts did a good job taking the lead in that area, and I hope we can continue and get that support.
So we have a few minutes left.
Sure.
Let's talk about why you're running.
So I'm running, and the last 2 days are a perfect example of it. It's scary out there, hearing bombs being delivered to people.
That's the
former
latest
presidents.
development.
Latest
We're
development.
taping this show today is October 25th.
25th. So I'm referring to the pipe bombs that were delivered to the Obamas, the Clintons, Biden, Holder.
It's my understanding they were intercepted, though.
Yes.
Didn't actually reach the people.
I don't believe they
intended
reached
for.
the people. So I think that thankfully, like, we have a very good law enforcement system and early detection. But I got in because I am afraid that the way the country's going and being divisive is heading in that direction where people are resorting to violence, and that you can't have a civil dialogue. So I think we need to be able to talk to each other and disagree in a civil fashion. I mentioned earlier that I played rugby. People might be familiar with the movie Invictus. It had Matt Damon and Morgan Freeman, talked about the World Cup team in '95 and how that helped unite South Africa. So I loved the movie, and then I got the book, and I got the book because I liked rugby, but what I really took out of it was Mandela's transition into a leadership role in the country. And he, over the course of a year or two, worked with the existing administration. You know, these are people who jailed him, who wanted him to die, and he had been tortured, yet he
came out forgiving.
And also was looking for that common ground, realizing that rugby was a sport that they were fanatical over, and then working with the Black and colored community to get behind it as well as something that you could bond on. And in my mind, if somebody like Nelson Mandela can do that, we can certainly do that as Americans. And I think one of the things I've talked about is kind of raising the level up. So I think when we're talking to each other one-to-one and work with neighbors and so forth, people are generally very supportive of each other. It's when they don't have that connection. So anything we can do to kind of build that connection, I think, is important. And we need to keep that dialogue open. So that was the main reason. And then healthcare is very concerning to me. I have a friend who has inflammatory breast cancer, and she is an attorney, and originally she was in private practice and funded her own. Later, when she found out she had cancer, she was married and was under her husband's plan. But if she had originally been under that original plan, she probably wouldn't be with us right now, because either lifetime limits or pre-existing conditions would have kicked in. My brother-in-law has multiple sclerosis, and he works as a fishing guide and manages a restaurant, and so he's kind of seasonal in his work. If he didn't have the ACA, he wouldn't have been able to get a lot of the care that he's gotten. And everybody has these stories. I think we need to be able to have a system that is more humane in that fashion and can kind of support us. And right now, the costs we pay are 50% more than other industrialized nations. So it's not like this extra money we're spending is getting us better care. The results are the same or worse.
They're
in
actually
some areas.
worse. If you look at the World Health Organization statistics, we're not doing as well as other countries.
Right, in most metrics. So that's, to me, that there's a better way of doing things then. So those were kind of the two big things that got me into the race.
Fascinating. It's been a pleasure speaking with you
Yes,
today.
you too. Thank you very much for having me on.
Really enjoyed this. Good luck with your campaign.
Thank you. Appreciate it. And another week and a half to go.
Yes, that's right. It's
So-
really coming up there very fast. For WestfordCAT News, this is Joyce Polino Crane. See you around town.